Good afternoon, and fellow listeners and viewers to my Caribbean News Flash channel. Now, the title of this afternoon's discourse is War and Disaster: How the United States or the US is turning the Caribbean into a battlefield. The Caribbean faces twin threats: natural disaster and military conflict. As Jamaica struggles to recover from Hurricane Melissa, Trinidad and Tobago growing military ties with the US are pulling the region into a dangerous game of geopolitics. In this program this afternoon, Caribbean News Flash, I will expose how the US is turning our region into the next battlefield, from relief aid to proxy wars. Stay tuned for this very interesting discourse or conversation. Now, first it was Hurricane Melissa tearing through Jamaica. Now it's US warships and soldiers showing up in our waters. Coincidence? Or is the Caribbean being quietly turned into a battlefield under our noses? This afternoon, we'll expose how the same forces that profit from our disasters are preparing for another kind of storm, a geopolitical one. Please like and share as you watch the video. Now, recently we know that we had a hurricane in Jamaica that tore apart the southwestern part of the island, and many people are still suffering. There are many deaths that are still unaccounted for, communities still marooned, and the list goes on. Now, this is what we call disaster capitalism, in which these people who are suggesting that they are donors and that they're charity organizations and they're aiding the country, they're there for profit, to profit from people's disasters, people's sufferings. Very important that you understand that. Now we're seeing where the United States has now sent the USS Gerald R. Ford's ship, that's warship, to the Caribbean, and that's the largest warship that has ever been dispatched or deployed to the Caribbean. Now, why is the United States doing this if it's not in preparation for a grand war, a big war between itself and Venezuela? Very important that we ask ourselves these questions. Now, we have to look at Trinidad's growing military cooperation with the United States, suggesting that we are not living in a zone of peace, but we're living in a zone of war. And notice that Trinidad's representative at the last, I should say, EU and CELAC summit in Colombia, held in Colombia, suggested that we are in fact living in a zone of war. Now, why is Trinidad, defiantly, continuously saying that making that form or sort of declaration? Something that we have to understand, that obviously Trinidad is controlled by the US State Department. Okay? Now, we're seeing where the United States is moving strategically to arrest and to capture and to control its interest here in the region. The Caribbean is not just a side story, it's a chessboard where a geopolitical war is being waged, and we've got to really come to grips with it. Okay, so we see where the United States sees that Venezuela is the largest producer of oil, has the largest oil reserves in the world, and Venezuela's oil and its proximity to the Caribbean makes the Caribbean region vulnerable and volatile. And we are seeing, when we talk about geopolitics, that China and Russia, they have strategic interests also in Venezuela and in the region at large. And the United States is reinvoking the Monroe Doctrine, suggesting that it alone should control the Western Hemisphere, particularly the Caribbean and Latin American region. Very important that we understand that. Yesterday, also, the anti-war online newspaper suggested that the United States has dispatched and right now has US soldiers in Panama training them in jungle war or jungle warfare, because they know that Venezuela has a lot of jungles, and hence they had to do that so that they can strengthen their combat team. their military team. Very important that we understand that. Okay? Now, we are seeing that the United States is making statements about security cooperation and the zone of peace being under threat. That's what they're saying, that if they do not get rid of drug traffickers and human traffickers and all of the problems that the Caribbean encounter, we can't live in a zone of peace. And Trump, in his Quantico, and also the Secretary of War, that is Pete Hegseth, at Quantico, Virginia, said that they have to launch preemptive wars, offensive wars, to ensure that peace is maintained in the world, in the region specifically. They say they're protecting democracy, but they're not even using democracy so much now. They're using peace and security and stability. These are the terminologies that the United States empire has decided now to use, because I think they've lost the narrative about spreading freedom and democracy, because people know that they're not. Okay? But who are they protecting us from? From Venezuelans or from Caribbean sovereignty itself? These are questions we must ask ourselves. Very important that we ask ourselves these questions. Okay? So we're seeing where Jamaica and Trinidad, two of the most important CARICOM nations, are engrossed right now in warfare tactics that the United States is using. One, Hurricane Melissa and the aftermath that comes with it, the economic strain that the post-Melissa, event has had on Jamaica, and forcing Jamaica to depend on foreign loans and aid, which is going to have the US now strangle us and tell us that we have to enter into partnerships and agreements that perhaps that we don't want to enter into. Okay, so we have US partnerships in disaster response and cybersecurity, which sound benign, but we're going to see expanded surveillance and control. And already people are talking about Starlink and Elon Musk, and we all know what Elon Musk is about. In fact, I was just watching a video with him, I have not yet finished watching it, in which he was talking about the mark of the beast. And much of what he was saying is true, but isn't he a part of that agenda also? That's for another video, okay? So stay tuned. So we're seeing now where we have military training in Trinidad with Southern Command, with what we call Southcom, rumors of logistical cooperation if a conflict with Venezuela escalates. That is, Trinidad is going through all of that, okay? And Trinidad has also maintained public silence from CARICOM on these developments, suggesting fear or complicity. So while Jamaica rebuilds from a storm, Trinidad is being militarized for another one, political, not natural. That is what we're seeing. And we're seeing now that the warships have arrived. Well, they've been here, but the largest warship has arrived. That's the USS Gerald R. Ford's ship. Okay, so we're looking at a new type of colonialism in the Caribbean that we cannot afford to ignore. And those of you who'd like to say whether the storm was man-made or, or natural, the effects from that or of the disaster is going to be deleterious to our development, to Jamaica's development, right? Whether or not the matter of narco-terrorism and homicide rates is something that Trinidadians need to be concerned about. But the fact of the matter, being plunged into a war zone is going to have even more dire consequences than 1,000, even 800 homicide rates per annum. I hope they understand that. Now, the United States is going to plunge both economies into debt-ridden economies to control the economies. And they're going to provide aid to influence policies, whatever policies. And they're going to say they're providing security partnerships or entering into security partnerships to anchor military presence, because I think that our region, the Caribbean and Latin American region, is being currently militarized by the US, by Russia, and also by China. Very important that we understand it for a bigger war, a larger war that is on the horizon. Our leaders call it partnership, but the map looks more like occupation. Very important that you understand that. All right? Now, I'm calling you to improve on your consciousness. We must wake up, because while we fight over politics and parties, the real power game is happening over our heads, literally, in the skies and the seas of the Caribbean. If we don't defend the zone of peace, it will become the zone of war. I repeat that. If we don't defend the zone of peace, it will become the zone of war. Drop your thoughts in the chat. Is the Caribbean being set up for a new Cold War? And how do we reclaim our sovereignty, if we ever had one in the first place, before it's too late? Maybe I should say, how do we reclaim what's left of our sovereignty before it's too late? Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. Now join me on my live, another live coming at 12 o'clock, 12 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, for another live this Sunday about Trinidad and Jamaica in terms of facing the disasters. Two of the most important CARICOM nations are involved, are being plunged into a war, or into war zones that may see the collapse of CARICOM as a bloc. Thank you so much for joining. See you in another one. Ciao.